And the immediate past Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Muda Yusuf, is calling on the federal government to quickly address the issue of forex scarcity that is threatening the economy. Muda Yusuf spoke earlier on This Day Live.
The first big factor driving demand and putting a lot of pressure on the foreign exchange market is fuel importation, which of course is an irony because we are an oil-producing country and we are perhaps the only oil-producing country in this situation where we spend billions of dollars importing petroleum products rather than reaping from the windfall that is happening in the oil market. So that is one major issue. The pressure of importing petroleum products, I'm talking about PMS, diesel, aviation fuel, and the rest of that, is putting a whole lot of pressure of demand on the foreign exchange market, and it's affecting our reserves as well. Then, of course, you have the challenge of round tripping. Round tripping is the opportunity that has been created by the current exchange rate regime, where you have a very big premium or difference between what the exchange rate is at the official window and what it is in the parallel market. It has never been this wide, at least in recent history. We are talking of a premium of close to 50%. You have about maybe 625, 626 or so in the official window. You have over 600 in the parallel market window. So you are looking at close to 200 naira premium. So that in itself is generating or fueling demand that ordinarily should not be within the ecosystem. Because you have a lot of people who are there as currency brokers. Theirs is to take advantage of the rate in the official window and sell it in the parallel market window. And this situation is fueling demand and is creating a whole lot of distortions in the foreign exchange market. Even beyond that, it's creating a whole lot of transparency issues of corruption and all of that within the entire ecosystem of the foreign exchange market. So that is also a major factor, and that is a policy-induced challenge. Then we have the challenge of the fact that most of our manufacturing firms are also dependent on imports for their raw materials and for equipment. And this is happening because all the key core industries, when I say core, they are heavy industries that are supposed to support the light industries. Examples are the iron and steel, the petrochemicals, the paper, paper industry like the Jepa paper mill, the Okuboku paper mill, and even the aluminum smelter.
Okay, let's bring in a RISE analyst, Professor Sam Amadi, and Ogbonna Ukuku, an investment and economic development expert, to look at this issue. Gentlemen, very warm welcome. Maybe I'll just start with Professor Sam Amadi and get back to Kuku, who is in offside studio. The suggestion by, the Governors Forum on how to mitigate the nation's economy, is that a workable economic suggestion to reduce federal workers from age 50 down? Will that not really shake the civil service like it happened in 1976 during late General Muritala Obasanjo regime?
Well, I was thinking about that. First, that one of the results of that military purge, as it was, is that it created institutional loss of memory. Many of the experts argue that perhaps the weakness, the lack of professionalism and the human capital deficits of the civil service came out of that process of purging, which was occasioned by allegation of corruption. And then back to the issue, you see, yes, people argue, by the way, in real economics terms, our public sector is not prohibitively large. It's because we're not productive. And so if you compare with Asia and, of course, standard recommendation, the public sector may not be that extremely large in terms of number, with something thousand people, like we said. But the point is that they're not productive. So again, if you want to reduce the number of civil servants because of personnel costs and all the lack of productive economy, I think we should develop a criteria around efficiency, maybe occupational discipline and qualification, expertise. So you can sort out people, retrain them, and provide incentive to migrate to either personal business or maybe other form of private employment. So the notion of taking out those who are 50, if you look at when we start progression in terms of entry into the civil service, at 50, you're probably going to have, if they do well, good promotion, maybe people who are essentially at middle to top management. And one can argue that it's not the right way to use age of stay in the civil service as a criteria. So it's going to have a problem of depleting maybe the level of expertise, experience that we need to run the civil service. And again, the counterfactual you ask yourself is, what's alternative? Are there other ways of dealing with those cost burden without necessarily asphyxiating and reducing the expertise and the efficiency of the civil service? So take, for example, people talk about the Olsen report. I mean, we've been talking about it all day long. But if you look at the cost center, if you look at where the costs are, the level of maybe the emolument, the travels overseas. When I was next chairman, I bound first class flight. I discovered that there was a service circular from the Secretary of Government then, 040 Kaite, that no public officer, including minister, should fly first class. Now, if you compare the cost of first class and medium economy ticket or business class, in some routes, it could be up to ₦1 million. So the question is, or more, is that these measures, though they proceed from a good intention of arresting, escalating, cost of governance, the measures are not well thought out. They could have dangerous, consequences, intended or unintended. More so when there are cheaper and more efficient alternatives to dealing with that. And again, maybe when we talk about the tax proposals, they too are problematic, because if you look at what they do, they could reduce capacity to consume, especially with the middle class, with working class. And again, if you look at the tax to GDP of Nigeria, maybe from 7 to 9%, the highest one was about 9.3 in 2011. Compared to other African countries, maybe we can see that our GDP, tax to GDP, is small. But the real question is, look at our minimum wage. So minimum wage, out of the first 10, 20 in Africa are not there. So countries like Kenya have about $91, Nigeria about $60. So clearly, the cost analysis and the cost-benefit analysis they have done is not comprehensive, right. and probably the programs are not well thought out, in my view.
Not well thought out. That is your opinion, Dr. Sam Amadi. Let's go to our next guest in the offside studio. Well, let's come to you, Ukuku, right now, and look at the fact that Steve Orosanye white paper was actually submitted some 11 years ago, and some suggestions were actually made in terms of scrapping some MDAs of government to help us reduce the high cost of governance, which any economist in the country would say is a major challenge right now. But Dr. Sam has said, you know what, this suggestion by the Governors Forum might be coming a little too late. Do you agree with him? Or do you think, you know what, should we look at the Steve Orosanye committee report and probably think about a way forward to cut the cost of governance? Do you think that's the way forward to go?
Anyway, on a lighter note, for me, if the governors think that everybody that is above 50 should be removed from the civil service, I think they should just start by resigning, So they should first of all resign, because I don't think there's any governor that is less than 50 years old, But on a more serious note, we have a problem-solving issue. We don't know how to solve problems. I think Africans will basically have that issue, because for you to be able to solve a problem, you must be able to critically look at issues. Now, if you don't critically look at issues, it becomes a bit difficult for you to decipher what decisions you must take. Now, one of the few things that they must consider here is the fact that, yes, anybody that is 50 years old in service now should be like an assistant director or a deputy director. Were they able to look at the severance package for each and every one of those people that they say they should remove from service? Where would the money come from? Now, it comes back to the same issue. Yes, we must prune down our level of spending. There are certain things we don't look at, little things that we don't look at. How many vehicles do most of these agencies buy? How much do they spend on flight tickets going from one place to another? How productive are we as a bureaucracy? So for me, the distance between having a state of anarchy and a centralized state is that ability to have a process that works. So if we don't have the capacity to create a process that works with the right people in right places, taking good decisions that will affect every other person, it becomes a bit difficult, because I always use it as a very simple example. Now, we have a problem of, let's say, let me use the mosquito as a simple example. Now, mosquito is a problem. Now, we expend so much money on trying to buy mosquito nets, treat malaria, donor agencies like Rollback Malaria, Global Fund, everybody's supporting us with millions of dollars to just solve the problem of malaria. But the simple question I will ask is, where does malaria come from? Malaria comes from mosquito. Where does mosquito come from? Mosquito comes from the environment. So if you spend less or 10 to 15% of the money you spend pursuing mosquito in putting your environment clean or making the environment unconducive for it to breed mosquitoes, you would have solved problems, but you'd have solved the same problem with less amount of money. So I just use that as a simple example to show you that we have a problem of our ability to solve problems. So if the governors are sitting down and then they are thinking of how to remove people from service because of their age, and I'm asking myself, did they think it through? Do they know what that would do to us? Do they know the economic impact to that? So anyway, by the time we begin to talk about the taxes and all of that, the other recommendations they've made, so I'll be able to throw more light on some of these issues.
Very good points there to anchor Okuku. Let's come back to you again, Sam Amadi. Two basic recommendations they've made: trim the civil service by setting retirement age, for those who want to go with generous payout offer. But can this work as it does in other crime? Like, should the government fan out some of its services to the private sector?
Well, yes, and the question is which services? Again, look, we've been running some kind of privatization. If you look at PPP, okay, so most of government these days, government is not setting up much of bureaucracy. They're using the private enterprises to work and call it public-private partnership. But what we've seen all over the world is that you need a strong and productive public sector to really make private sector deliver on PPP. If you look at the PPP structures, whether you consult documents from the Concession Infrastructure Regulation and Concession Commission, or BPE, you see that only when it is well structured, number one, only when it's well monitored, which requires an efficient public service, have we got the value of PPP. But the bigger question here is a question of production. And that's why the minister says we've got more of a revenue than a debt crisis. So first, you must be able to say, that I was a member of the Presidential Committee on Reform of Public Sector. There have been several of those reforms and reports. And what they tell us is, look, you are not getting jobs, people employed are matched to function. If you look at every ministry and agency, how much are they delivering on their mission statement in terms of what do they produce, what do they add, what's the value addition? Again, it's not even so much as to number of staff, but mismatch. So you see people in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission having persons who have the skills and the competencies to be there. And you see people probably in Central Bank or in FRS having scientists working there because those places pay more because of the corrupt process of recruitment. So what people are talking about is, look, let's move into an entrepreneurial state, a state that first sees itself as efficient state, focusing on production. And then some jobs you can give to the private sector to do because they have the best competencies and at the least cost to deliver for you. But most of the job that the public sector does are jobs that you don't need to outsource. And we're moving away from a neoliberal economy to realize that, look, developmental state, which is where we should be, where the East Asians were, where Europe was before they become great, where America was under the Secretary of Treasury of Hamilton, the Madisonian Revolution. And the idea is a state that itself is actively pushing resources, mobilizing resources, and creating opportunity for even the private sector. So take, for example, our privatization. Even if you bring the best private sector firms, if you don't define the task for them, if you don't have capacity to set the job for them well, and then provide a complementary policy to help them and get an environment that helps them to deliver, they will fail. So yes, we should be outsourcing. We should be, franchising out some of the function are not core to public sector. But the primary commitment here is to create a workforce that that's able to create resources, produce, and then validation, and then the economy grows. And back to what we used to talk about, integrated economy. So what we're running today is some kind of economies that are in, if you like, in holes. So you get here, they're not connected. So you don't pay workers well because you don't know that paying workers well. It's also a way of boosting consumption and stimulating production. So we need to integrate our economy so that we don't do winner takes or win-lose. So when we talk about minimum wage is connected to consumption and connected to economic growth and also connected to profit for businesses. Well, so these are all the way to look at it.
If I wasn't sure about what you studied in school, I would have thought you were an economist, because that is what a lot of the economists would actually speak about these days, looking at the fact that, what we're seeing in Nigeria is unprecedented as it stands. Looking at the fact that even the argument of the Minister of Finance might not hold waters anymore, because if you look at quarter one, we saw the debt to GDP rose to about 23%, compared to about 22% what we saw as at the end of last year. If you try to compare that with the realities of today, it might be something out of the ordinary. But let me come to Ogbonnaya right now in our offside studio. What was he talking about? The Steve Orosa committee report and its implementation, and if it's even possible at the end of the day. The Governors Forum are actually making a suggestion. They're saying, that committee report did say merge some of the government agencies that seem like to be replicating its own duties. My question is it going to be feasible just at the federal level if the state is not doing the same thing? Or do you think both of the levels of government have to do this at the same time for us to see any visible result that will be far-reaching for the ordinary Nigerian?
Yeah, whether we like it or not, the reality is still staring at us. Now, if you do a manpower audit on our bureaucracy, it will actually show you that there is a lot of mismatch, there's a lot of inequality when it comes to payments, salary payment, and what people get, benefits and all of that people get. So it actually will affect productivity. Then are we able to implement that now? So I'm asking, why are the governors talking about it now when we have less than a year for the entire government to wrap up? So, I think it's a wrong timing. And then again, some of these agencies that they're talking about were all established by an act from the National Assembly. So how are you going to go back to the National Assembly to begin to repeal some of these laws? So, it's not as easy as they make it seem, as if you just call two agencies and say, okay, all of you come together and then become one. It's not that easy. So a lot of work has to go into it. Like I said, manpower audit has to be carried out so that who fits, who will match here and all of that. So you'll be able to fit, put round pegs in, round holes. So, it's a lot of work. Yes, it's going to prune down, the size of government. But the savings you're going to make from there, let me use the word savings you're going to make from there, might not be as significant as our ability to usefully, administer the resources that are received amongst the three tiers of government, especially the people at the sub-government level. The expenditure at that level, nobody's scrutinizing it. Most of the state assemblies are all in the pocket of the state governors. So their budgets are not questioned. Nobody's really doing proper oversight. The amount they collect for what you might call it, the security vote that nobody looks into. So, everybody we just play, we keep doing this game blame, we keep blaming each other. This is where the problem is. But I still think that there has to be a sit down where, everybody comes, the federal, the state governors will sit down and say, don't just make recommendations. Can we also look at your own books? What are you doing with the monies that you're collecting? You're supposed to be productive. Okay. One of the issues we've had when it comes to industrialization is our raw material supply strategy. Just like the earlier program talked about, the amount of money we spend on raw material alone is actually on importing raw material. because we don't have the ability to, get raw materials out of what we have. Like, for example, I was talking about a particular candy the last time, and I did mention the major raw material you need for candy is gotten from cassava. Glucose syrup is gotten from cassava. So if 80% of what you need to make candy is gotten from cassava, and there is no factory where they make glucose syrup in the whole of Nigeria, from Iseyin all of the way to Zamfara State. So what are we saying? So these are things which, that the state governors have to support agriculture for it to work, because you have to scale agriculture. You have to be able to provide, road to farm gates and stuff like that, so that you'll be able to support industrialization. So it becomes a bit difficult. So for me, if they are making a case now, I just believe that everybody's just trying to play that blame game so that they can win elections, or they can convince their people that it's not our fault and all of that. I don't think it's the right time to even start talking about this kind of thing, right?
Wow.
Thanks so very much, Bona, there. Bringing out core issues. And Dr. Sam Amadi, two things, strike me here. First is that what are the nation's industrial or research institutes doing? You have FIRO, quite a number of them that I can't even name them all, and yet we are import dependent on raw materials. So the factory is here to function. Secondly, the issue of taxation, as raised by the governors, 30,000 naira minimum wage. What do you want to tax there with, the hyperinflation we are seeing in this country? How feasible?
Well, let's start with tax. The governor's argument is that, look, when you look at the tax to GDP ratio, we are very low. So the argument is that, look, we're receiving less from tax, about 7.8. If you look at countries like maybe some of the Scandinavians, or you look at Sicily, for example, in Africa, they have way more than 20%, Morocco, and so on and so forth. So the argument is that there's a window to increase tax. Now, our VAT is 7.5. If you go to South Africa, it's about 17, and so on and so forth. So basically, yes, but if you look at it in practical terms, how should you design your tax policy? You should look at first income. They look at issues around disposable income and issues around what goods and what services you think you want to increase, either import duty or export duty. You look at whether they are price elastic. That means, can people really opt out of those products? So Nigeria needs to be careful to design all this. But back to this requirement about taxing people who earn more than 30,000 now, or if you look at our tax bracket, the first thing is many people are escaping being taxed. Businesses, entrepreneurs, corporations. If you look at NATI's report every time, they're always corporations who are not either paying, especially the oil and extraction industry. So optimal tax is what people focus on, but we should focus on optimal tax system, including the cost of administration. But bottom line is, you have two problems in Nigeria: high poverty and high inequality. With Gini coefficient inequality of about 35.10% as at 2019, and some people say now about 40%, Nigeria has a large inequality bracket. So if you're going to tax more of these poor who have low access, more vulnerability, low access to resources, low minimum wage, like I said, about $50 to $60 per month, whereas even Kenya is about 9 to 1. South Africa talking about $200 something. The highest in Africa, like Sicily, is about $450 something. So if you look at the disposable income available to the poor, taxing them is both increasing poverty and increasing inequality. So the question then is, can we also tax more people who are in the upper class more? Can we also look at some goods? For example, people say, why don't we have property tax? There are many properties around Abuja. So if you want to raise public revenue, which is important, because if you don't raise revenue, you can make expenditure in public services are critical. Look at the property tax now. Look at the properties in Abuja, high profile. You can design rent. For example, anybody who is living like a full bungalow, a full, what they call, a full house, okay? You can give them, they pay more of property tax. And those who are so as not affect the poor, small houses, two-bedroom flats in neighborhoods can be cheaper. So we need to redesign our tax policy and public finance revenue collection to relieve the poor and target those who can afford it. Yes, it's important for government to raise public revenue, because the only way you can raise revenue, you can improve the economy, is either you raise revenue or you reduce cost of expenditure.
Can you deal with the issue of the research institute?
Now, very important, two things. He talked about industrial policy. You see, since we signed up to the neoliberal framework, we have underplayed the importance of proper industrial policy, which builds from researched production. So if you look at PRODA, we had it, building on the Civil War, you have the defense deacon. But the Ministry of Science and Technology has not worked together with the Ministry of Finance. You see, if you look at the Asians, Taiwan, all these countries, they leveraged on that innovation and technology and science into production. So we need to rebuild back through research into innovation, into production, because it can't really talk about growing the economy focusing on financialization, these banks and all that. You have to start with production for agro to manufacturer, and that requires a lot of research.
That is quite critical at this point of time. When you look at our nationhood, looking at the fact that Nigeria as it stands right now, we are still heavily import dependent, and for a country that is, non-productive when it comes to when you compare what we produce and what we consume, there's no even comparison looking at it. And let me come to you, Ogbonnaya, real quick right now. Looking at the fact that even the Minister of Finance would say Nigeria has a revenue issue. We don't necessarily have a debt issue. But at the end of the day, what the ordinary Nigerian on the street wants to hear about is how do we move forward in a way where the ordinary Nigerian is not hungry. He can afford the basic needs. He can afford the basic things that he needs to feed his family. And how can we move forward to a more prosperous Nigeria, despite all of these negative indices that face us every day?
Okay, while I believe so much in having a comprehensive tax system, we need to design our tax system considering the inequality that exists when it comes to our financial system. Now, first things first, my company and Dangote's company should not be paying the same amount of tax. It's not done anywhere. It's only in Nigeria I find such kind of things. Now, I'm saying this because, the rich should pay more, and then, the lower income people should pay less. But I do not subscribe. That is the only place I will agree with the governors that everybody must be taxed in Nigeria, no matter how little. Everybody, see, let me tell you, it has an implication when it comes to economic development. I say this because when monies are taken from you, you have a stake in that. You become a stakeholder. Now, even let me take you back to the Bible. The Bible says where a man's treasure is, that's where his heart is. Most people are not involved in this nation because they are not paying tax. And if everybody begins to pay tax, it now becomes, if that poor man on the street that they will bribe tomorrow to vote for someone, if he had paid 1,000 naira every month, and then somebody comes to give him 5,000 naira after 4 years, he won't talk to you. So these are the implications. These are the things we have to also consider. My point is everybody should be taxed. And then again, now if we're looking at revenue, see, we have an issue of revenue, and then what are we doing about the revenue? We're overlooking certain things. Yes, taxation. There are certain areas where we have no tax. Prof talked about property tax. Those are things that we need to consider. Everybody knows that. It's been said, I think it was a research by Oxfam also that said we have over I can't remember the amount of money they mentioned, in trillions of dollars dead capital in real estate in Nigeria. So if those kind of properties exist all over the place in Nigeria and they are not being taxed, yes, they can do speculation. But if you can use such properties as third-party collateral to support industrialization, because there has to be a financial engineering that will be able to accommodate third-party collateral. Now, you see, it helps people. Is either your property is paying tax or is supporting industrialization, because our participation in global value chain is actually zero as far as I'm concerned.
Well, that is quite awful. Zero. What a mark to score. Thanks very much, Ogbonnaya Ukuku. He's an economist and an investment analyst and expert, and Associate Professor of Law and a RISE analyst, Sam Amadi. Thanks, gentlemen, for shedding more light on this new economic development.